All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. My name is Meredith Albertson, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer at Resonate, and I'm honored to be the moderator for today's conversation. Now, independent agencies are navigating a genuinely difficult moment. AI has flattened differentiation. Holding companies are selling data products and cutting into margins, and clients are more willing than ever to take that work in-house. Now, today's session is all about how independent agencies can respond and thrive by creating a new marketing operating system of proprietary data, owned audience intelligence, and an AI-ready strategy. Now, in this fireside chat, we're going to get specific because that's important. What does this look like? Where are pitches actually being won and lost? And how your agency can move from billable hours to recurring revenue built on outcomes. Now, before introducing our experts today, I'd like to invite all of you to make this an interactive session. We love to incorporate your questions during our dedicated Q&A section that we're going to have at the end. Now, you're going to notice there's a Q&A function on Zoom. So please use that throughout today's content to submit your questions, and we're going to try to get to as many of those as we can at the end. All right, so now the important part. Let's meet our panelists. Joining me today are two people who know this topic inside and out. First, I'd like to introduce Jay Pattisall. He's a vice president and principal analyst at Forrester, where he covers the future of the agency sector, in housing, media, and he also covers AI-powered marketing that includes content development and production solutions for CMOs and agency leaders across the industry. And we also have Jonathan Ricard, our Chief Strategy Officer here at Resonate. And he brings more than 20 years of expertise at the intersection of data, marketing, and digital media in the agency space. Jonathan has been a senior executive at high-growth startups, SaaS, and data companies. Jay, Jonathan, welcome. We are so glad to have you today.
Thank you. Great
Thank
to
you,
be here.
Meredith.
All right, so let's get into these questions. I am super excited about today's conversation. Even going through our touch points and rehearsals, you guys there had no shortage of really amazing things to say. Now, from each of your respective vantage points, one looking at the market more broadly and one that is inside agency conversations every day, what do each of you think are the areas of greatest opportunity that independent agencies can really seize right now? Jonathan, do we want to start with you?
Sure. I mean, I think Meredith, it's a great question. I think a lot of the folks that we talk to every day are focused on, what is changing and what does it mean for me? Is there an opportunity? How do I take advantage of that opportunity? Where we start to see most of the interest right now is in response to pressure on the agencies. There's pressure on their margins. There's pressure on how they're going to adopt AI. There's pressures on how they're going to be thinking about what it means to be an agency over the next 2 years and starting to lay out the plans to accomplish that. What we think is the opportunity there is to actually plan ahead, right? Plan for the change that's coming. It's not going to be possible to, stay in your current lane, but you have to start to look at where are these macro trends and how are they going to influence your business. So when we think about that margin pressure, we see the opportunity as agencies are going to continue to be asked, how are you going to lower cost of service on an FTE model or a people and markup model in the presence of AI solutions, making it much faster and easier to do certain types of work, right? Not all the work, but some of the work. And the way that we see the opportunity to overcome that is conversations that really are focused now on what are the products that are being brought by agencies for their clients to purchase, right? How do you shift the narrative from we're selling you expertise and service to we're selling you expertise and products that we can use to drive outcomes for your brand? And I mean, I think that's the first start of everything is the opportunity is to understand that there is significant points of pressure and how do agencies start to lean into a product-based model that tailors itself to outcomes for their brands and driving continual and repeatable success.
Absolutely. Jay, what about you? What do you think those areas right now are just the greatest areas of opportunity for independent agencies right now?
Well, Jonathan said it really well that there's the bifurcation or divergence, if you will, along the expertise and service that agencies have always brought versus technology and productization. And it's almost like they're diverging along the lines of automating marketing campaigns. Not all of it. You know, Jonathan, I think you really correctly pointed out that it's some pieces of the marketing supply chain, not all of them,
Right.
that automation impacts. But so automating marketing campaigns versus um, augmenting the professionals inside agencies. And at the same time, if there's this automation versus augmentation divide, there's also scaling execution, which we've been hyper focused on for at least the last 5+ years, versus the expertise and the guidance of marketing. And while expertise and guidance is the tried and true value of many agency partners, it's even more relevant today because of the marketing transformation imperative that a lot of organizations are feeling. And those are a lot of words, and what I mean by that is that organizations are trying to change the way they work, and make marketing part of the business as opposed to a cost center that's attached at the end of the business. And so no matter which way the agency selects, for the agencies that are with us today, no matter what your strategy is, it requires basically the right stack in order to do this, because it's really not one or the other. It's a little bit of both. It's how much consultation and expertise and service are we going to provide versus our balance of our product mixtures. So the opportunity, I think, for the indie agencies is buying or building a marketing operating system. And we think of the marketing operating system as a software that essentially leverages data, insights, machine learning, the foundation models that comprise generative AI, and agents that are emerging is in this coming, not quite there, but coming agentic future to kind of facilitate the end-to-end workflow. And part of that is automated and part of that is incredibly human. And so, whether it's objectives or brief development or ideation or production or activation or optimization, there are elements of people and machines that are involved in that. And the indie's ability to stand that up for their clients is a huge opportunity. It's
Yeah.
not the only opportunity, but it's a yeah. I mean, there are other opportunities, right? There's creator marketing, influencer marketing opportunities. There's productizing repeatable solutions. There's improving measurement, incrementality, MMM. There's the fact that indies have talent and culture, and do that very, very well. These are opportunities in addition to that, but I think the marketing operating system opportunity is a big one.
Jay, I think you're absolutely right on that point. One of the things that we're seeing, and I think is coming up in a lot of the conversations right now is, it was what, a certain number of years ago that all the holdcos made their investments in buying data companies, right? Big
Yeah.
expenditures on data to start to better understand that aspect of the business. And at the time, those were huge outlays, right? Something far beyond the scale of almost any independent agency to go and match and try to purchase against, right? And they weren't seen as core to most agencies and what they did. I think when you think about that marketing OS today, given the rise of agentic solutions that are coming, right? We have some promise there. Given the rise of some of the efficiencies through, Gen AI in general to the workflow, part of I think the key for independent agencies now is you've got to start thinking about, and we see this across a lot of the folks we talk to, is you've got to start thinking about your own consumer data layer, your own ability to create unique insights to compete both with each other, with the holdcos as they start to think about downstream marketing. But this idea that your tech stack isn't just a stack, right? Your marketing OS isn't just the tools you use to buy. It has to go all the way back to how do you think about a consumer first strategy and make sure that's integrated into that marketing OS. And I think a few years ago that was out of reach for most agencies
Mhm.
to contemplate. But now it seems like the market's moving more towards a conversation around if you can't bring your own proprietary view of the consumer and do something with it, you're going to be behind the curve, right? And I think about this today as just if you built your plans for your business in January, by March, they were all out of date as consumers have changed around affordability, tariffs, gasoline prices, the hit to discretionary spending. Like all of that's been a change over the last, 90 days. If you don't have that asset yourself, you're going to struggle inside of, even your best laid, other options is you've got to be current with that type of information. So I think there's an imperative in that stack to own the consumer data layer for your clients and be able to bring that to build product and services off of.
Yeah. That's correct. The thing that I would add to that, Jonathan, is when we think about it in the context of like what holding companies have purchased, over the years, and like I mean, you set it up nicely. I think about 2016. I think Dentsu bought Merkle, and along with that came the Merkle proprietary data set, and it was something like maybe 2 billion for that
Right. I
for
think it
that
was right
transaction.
around billion and a half-ish.
Right. Maybe it was less than, maybe it was a little bit less than that. And then the price points kind of exponentially increased over the time where, Axiom went for more to IPG,
Yep.
Epsilon went for the most. And then, arguably, the Omnicom acquisition of IPG was not entirely centered around Axiom, but what, that $13 billion transaction was, that was an important part of it.
For
So
sure.
if you're an indie agency and you hear that, you're like, oh my God, like, okay, $13 billion, right? So it's a tremendous price tag, but but you're inside your point is a really important thing for indie operators, which is you don't need to spend $2 billion to buy a data asset. You need to take the data that you have and start enriching and harnessing that and matching it with your clients' first party data sets to create a repository of intelligence inside your organization that you
Exactly.
can wield. And what I think I'm saying is that this is don't let price points make this seem not achievable. It is achievable with the right planning and the right strategy to capture third party data, enrich it with your own knowledge, and to use all of that to enrich your customers' first party understanding of their clients and customers.
Yeah, I think that bringing those pieces together is going to create the right type of navigate a relationship through this change for the agency to continue to have for their clients, right? Everything else may change, but I can help you understand who your best customer is, how to best reach them, and then I can go help you execute. Even
Yep.
as that mechanism of execution changes, that still remains a core value proposition that agencies, I think, can and should seize as they go
Yes.
into this year.
Yeah. And for me, the marketing operating system was, you know, sort of the kind of the start point for this discussion is it can be a tool to help indie agencies level the playing field, in that regard.
So I think that's a great point. This is a leveling the playing field motion. Now, the idea of the marketing operating system, feeding and building, consumer data layer, Jonathan, that you mentioned, but this marketing OS, this idea is a profound one. So for the folks from these agencies on the call, what are the core features that you believe a marketing OS needs, that agencies who are building this marketing OS need to build first? And why do you think that these are the most important?
Sure, Jay, do you want to go first?
You want me to go first? Okay,
Yeah, go
great.
ahead.
Sorry, being polite. Uh,
Oh, I'm not doing my job. I should have let you guys know, so I
no, you're
apologize.
you're doing a wonderful job. Um, I think the first decision is platform versus platform. Sorry, someone pronounce that properly. Platform versus like an overlay of interoperable connectors.
Okay.
And so to build upon that is, do you want to build a proprietary platform that your agency and your clients, assuming that they would pay for this, can work within, that is kind of, within your four walls, so to speak, that is your discrete specific platform? Or do you build an interoperable layer of connectors that sits on top of the client's stack. It sits on top of their Salesforce or their DAM or their CDP and
Mhm.
all the other components. And within that is like the agency's APIs and the agency's agents and the intelligence that Jonathan we just talked about that the agency builds, that helps activate, on top of that. And the reason I say that is we're seeing both. We're seeing
Mhm.
I'm seeing, both the platform approach, and the connector approach. The platform approach is a bit dated, if you will, and that should not be interpreted as dated in a negative, meaning it is where things started several years ago. And as the technologies inside the holding companies developed this layer of connectors, this interoperable layer is like the newest version of that. And so there's like a timestamp on these approaches, and that necessarily doesn't mean one's better or another. It's just trial and experimentation. And so that's the first choice, is like, do you you know do we build a platform, or do we build something that can kind of interoperably fit on top of whatever situation? If platform, then I think the anatomy of the marketing operating system as a platform is five things. It's a SaaS-based interface that houses the apps and the workflow. So the thing that you log into at your
Right.
desk, right?
Exactly.
An audience ID graph, whether that be proprietary or a more kind of first party, third party powered version that we just talked about, that is part of that ecosystem and platform, a media planning and activation portal or technology that spins the work, that takes the audience first approach to start to put strategy in place, and move from strategy, channel selection, budgeting, allocation, channels, so on and so forth. Um, an ideation sandbox for those that play in the content development area, increasingly both creative and media agencies, as they're starting to
Mhm.
kind of reintegrate. So the creative tools that can help facilitate that. I do see some having content supply chain as part of that, for production versioning, if that becomes, part of their business as well. So interface, ID graph, planning, ideation, and a production content supply chain are the components of the platform approach.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jay. When I think about that, I think you kind of alluded to this in terms of people are going to decide what they're going to build, what they're going to layer. I think on a macro level, agents are going to find themselves into kind of three camps, right? Those folks who want to buy who want to build it themselves. So they're going to be the bakers. All they're going to want is raw ingredients from their marketplace. And that's
Yep,
becoming easier to do with both APIs and this idea of, again, the promise of what an
yep,
agentic interconnected ecosystem looks like. Bakers are going to be, and even inside of a baker model, on certain parts of that stack that you just laid out, they're still going to need to actually be, either a cake box buyer, right, where it's a lot of pre-made ingredients ready to go, or they're going to need to buy a full cake. And I think that's going to be a maturity curve that, we're working with our clients to figure out, and that I think the market's trying to figure out is where does it make sense for an agency to invest in being a baker? And where should they just continue to buy the cakes? And what's in between, right? Because a lot of things are changing really quickly, right? The idea that you would have full APIs, for example, into Salesforce a couple of years ago was ludicrous. They had
right,
such lock-in around the platform. But now, we're seeing whether it's through Agentforce or other things, they're opening that up more so than they ever have. And there's a concept of, when does the SaaS platform become, in some cases, a always-on orchestration layer that you may or may not be logging into, right? The thing that you formerly had to do, hands-on keyboard actions may now be more and more of an agent-based workflow driven somewhere
right.
else.
Yeah,
So I think that's the model we think is really important for everyone to consider is where do you want to be a baker? Where can you create unique competitive advantage by doing that? Versus where are you going to be assembling certain ingredients that are pre-made and where are you just saying, you know what, for these functions, I need someone else to be my expert that I can plug in. That doesn't mean it's not part of your core stack, I don't think. I don't think it means that you're not taking ownership of the outcomes as a principle, and this is part of my product stack today. But it's no longer just a so I think that's part of the piece is that you're not going to just outsource those solutions and treat them as disposable transactional relationships. I think independent agents are going to be investing more into which pieces do they want to own inside of that and build real specific expertise on.
Yeah, they're things that you can buy and incorporate versus the things that might need to be engineered that's specific to your agency. And that's that again that's circumstantial. But I like I like your food analogy. I think it makes sense. It's almost, it's like, do we go to the grocery store or do we order the meal box, right?
Exactly.
And and at the end of the day, you're making a meal in some capacity or another. It's how you go about it, right? Is your point.
Exactly. And I think that's going to be the maturity curve, right? It's folks who believe they can invest and make meaningful product themselves. They have a path, they understand it. They have, you mentioned them earlier, they have the experts in-house to take advantage of this change, to augment and amplify what they can do. Like I think that's going to be a really exciting place for those folks. I also think it's part of the change for the agencies is trying to manage that sense of where is my team going to be capable? Do I need experienced folks who I can amplify, or do I bring in AI native folks and
Hmm.
maybe shake up my organization with a different perspective on how we could work
Hmm. I mean, there are a
inside of
lot of
that decision?
well, there are a lot of organizations, a lot. There are a few organizations that have really there's three or four that I can think of just off the top of my head that are compositionally their employee what their employee base looks like is very different now than compared to 5 years ago, where a good 40% are very product centric or engineering centric, implementing and enabling on behalf of clients, but building on behalf of the agency as well. And that is in addition to um, the the marketing experts that are delivering the services and adding the value on top of the products. And so, compositionally, this gets into the approach that you select as a as an agency leader, gets into the talent that you'll need um, to populate your agency with.
For sure. I think we see more focus right now on making sure we know who the agency's product teams members are as a business, who their data solutions and data product teams are, because the presence of those individuals suggests a certain level of that maturity curve, right? If your agency's invested in those individuals, then we know you're going to try to build products. We know you're going to try to build services on top of those people's expertise, which is why you're bringing them in, right? You're no
Hmm.
longer just reselling capability, but you're actually looking to build and enhance that capability from the ad tech vendor space, right? In the MarTech vendor space. So I think, to me, that's a leading indicator of the independent agencies that are leaning in on this point is changing their composition of staff
Mm.
to make that investment into data products folks, data
Hmm.
solutions, overall internal centralized products. And at some level right now, products and AI leads that are being empowered to go make change happen for the shop.
All right, so you guys have done a great job talking about and bringing us along, learning more about the ingredients of the the marketing OS. But I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit and talk about how a marketing OS starts to really impact an agency strategy. Jonathan, you were talking a little bit about this earlier, but how do we really think about educating and persuading the clients of an agency on the value and the outcomes of a marketing OS? And think about like what does the client pitch now look like through this lens of a marketing OS? Jay, do you want to kick us off there?
Yeah, sure. There's an interesting set of data that I think that it starts to inform this situation. We've been surveying the agency population for 3 years now around the behaviors and the use of AI, and this year for the first time we started to ask about agentic as well. And what we're seeing is that about 60% of agencies use generative AI essentially as cost of business. It's not being monetized, and and it's about 44% for agentic. Interesting that 44% not monetizing it, meaning that actually a larger percentage are. It's about 9% of agencies are in fact monetizing as a line of business generative AI, and 15% for agentic. So that, I think that is clearly, an indicator. But like when you pull back from that, the client pitch, which was your question, is that we use this technology for our productivity, and what this data represents, whether it's being said that way or not, is an interesting question. But what it suggests is that the value is being harvested internally, and and the productivity advantage of AI is being most leveraged by the agency for its employees, for its work, and what I think that translates into is their margin.
Right.
So the value is being captured for the agency margin, and is not being monetized for fully monetized for client value. Now there's some that are. And so I think before you get to like how you pitch this, there's a decision to be made, which is this for us or is this for our clients? And once that decision is made and is pursued, then you can start to unfold what the benefit looks like to the client, based upon the presence of AI as part of the marketing equation.
Jay, it's interesting because I agree with you on that point, and I think back to conversations I was having, basically about 9 months ago, I would say, with some of the larger independent agencies where they were already getting inbound calls from their clients asking to renegotiate fee structures on time spent on tasks, with the expectation that agentic solutions or even just Gen AI was going to shrink that time requirement. So how can we pre-negotiate our rates even while you're still trying to figure out how to stand up these systems, because we know you're going to have less time spent on this work, and we don't want to pay the same rates for the output, right? Because the output was being based on time and overall support mechanisms. I think that idea that you're raising here, of that many of the first look was inward on how do we improve our efficiency so we can have cost reductions or service more clients with the same number of, with the same resources we have to create an incremental margin, is absolutely true. And I think some of that was from pressure by the advertisers themselves, already pre-forcing that pressure on them. Is how are you going to get more efficient faster to lower my bills?
Hmm.
I think the marketing OS side comes back around to this, which is how do you reshift that conversation to say, hey, we're going to deliver you great outcomes. No longer worry about how long it's going to take me to do that, right? We've got products that you're going to license, you're going to buy through us, or we are going to leverage on your behalf to get you to outcomes, which is a different business model, right? But that's going to be what you should be worried about, not so much how long it takes us to do the task anymore, because that's becoming an insignificant conversation.
I think it's a good point of because it illustrates the tension between the efficiency from the scale of AI versus the what should be the pitch, which is the effectiveness, or the ability to produce more relevant, localized and personalized marketing based upon all of the intelligence signals, and your understanding of the brand and its audiences, just in a faster way for sure, but
Sure.
but but in a more effective way. And so right now, I think the predominant pitch is that we can do this faster and we can create scale for you in a way that you've not done or not been able to do previously. And the pitch should eventually turn to, we can create better work as a result of these tools and as a result of this understanding, because we're matching your audiences with the right messages, with the right context, with again, it's the personalization promise, I think, coming to fruition. And when you're producing better work, then to the point that you've made a couple of times, Jonathan, you can focus on the outcome as opposed to how you created the outcome, and not remunerate on the time, but remunerate on the results.
Right. Yeah, I think that's going to be a really important, an agency's going to have to bring their new solution set, right? Whether it's platforms, whether it's the connective tissue layers, it's the function of their people, and have a conversation now that's going to be a little different because you have to prove that you're building something that's going to stand up to the very first question I think you get asked, which is, well, how do I know this is best of breed? What makes the agency have the credibility to bring me these new services, right? And I think, we've talked a little bit about the need to have the people that can actually, generate confidence, right? The product organizations, the investment to show the confidence in this to the clients. And then it has to be tied to the overall, downstream outcomes. Like we've built these capabilities to deliver these outcomes. We understand how to do that effectively. And I think it'll be up to each agency to think about how much are they saying it's all, homegrown, baked, and how much of it is we've assembled, we're leveraging this generative AI layer and agentic layer because we've invested in figuring it out. So now we actually can navigate what we think are going to be changes, regardless of where those changes take us in 12 to 18 months. When you think about how fast the evolutions happened from 12 to 18 months ago to now, suggesting that answer is probably no one's going to really believe you, but
Hmm.
suggesting the general trend of the industry and the acceleration of the fact that these systems are coming and they're going to come faster and faster and be better and better. Our CTO likes to say the worst any of this stuff is going to be is today, right? It's going to continue to get better from this point forward. And that's a really both scary, I think, for a lot of folks concept, but as well as if you're leaning into it, what an amazing way to pitch your business is helping a brand navigate something they haven't invested in the same way
Yeah,
and have never had to from their marketing function.
right. I think another important piece of the pitch, back Meredith, back to your question, is it are the people that are part of this. We've spent a healthy amount of the time talking about the tools, and the tools are important, but the tools are tools, and it's the information that goes into it and what you do with it that matters most. And ultimately, I think what agencies will be offering is not an agency of record, but an algorithm of record, or an algorithm that is created using the tools and the knowledge of your experts, their expertise, their tastes, their experience, plus all of the intelligence infrastructure that you put together. These things come together and they create your brand's expression, if you will, of how to use, how to do AI marketing. And so you get selected for your algorithm, that is about, your people, your tools, and your data, which is a new thing, and an interesting thing. And it's not any one of those things; it's all of them together.
Yeah, I agree with that, Jay. I think that's a really interesting way to reframe it up is that you have to now, and I think the important part was the addition of data to that.
Mm,
Like what is that proprietary asset set that helps you make better decisions in a world of everyone's going to have access to some level of AI created, Gen AI created data, right? How are you going to actually have something that's provable, measurable, that can create incremental outcomes for your clients, right? Otherwise, that isn't part of a unique pillar for your shop.
hmm
Well, guys, we've got about, I think about 10, 11 minutes left. I think it's always important to talk about the gotchas, the barriers. Are there things that independent agencies need to be thinking about as they're putting together a plan to talk about, like, we want to implement this concept of a marketing OS at our business? What do they need to do to get out of their own way to really make this shift successfully? Jay, Jonathan, either one of you want to jump in first on this one?
I'll be happy to kick this one off, Jay. We've put it
Okay.
on you most of the call. So let me,
Okay.
most of our fireside chat. So, I think part of that question, Meredith, leads to, where is your agency currently have? Because obviously we're using the word agency and we know there's a massive spectrum of agencies inside of that generic
True.
term, right? Everything from strategy, creative, performance, full service, cross-channel, omni-channel, so there's a lot of ways we can have some nuance to that piece. And I think we've generally tried to speak to it at its most macro point. Where I think it is first is what is the pressure that they're going to feel from their clients on areas that they can make improvement, right? So is it a cost, is their business model ready to transform to this new
Mm.
approach to how agencies are going to work? You have to have that conversation internally is, are you ready and able to transform your business model, right? Because can you shift lanes away from, time-based billings to outcome-based billings, right? Or some hybrid in between there. Do you have the people who will be able to, you can amplify to continue to drive outcomes on this in an evolving world, right? Or do you have a lot of folks who really know the way things work today, but may not be, flexible enough and able to make the transition because you've taught them such specific process over the last N number of years on how things get done right and get done well, and
Hmm.
that may start to shift. I think one of the big gotchas is going to be is, if you're channel siloed in your approach, um, does agentic buying mechanisms, agentic solutions that both brands launch themselves and the agencies launch start to break down some of that cross-channel silos and give you a different output in the market? So, that's the starting framing here. Specifically, I think I would say that you have to have a knowledge of your ability to make that transformation is the number one gotcha. Are you ready to invest in that? Can you move faster than, for example, a holdco? I would hope
Hmm.
most independent agencies can, right? I would hope most of them can move faster than holdcos. And can you, and within that, where are you going to focus your ability to move quickly? What's going to be the piece that helps you continue your current track record of success as an agency, but allow you to move quickly to make some changes associated to that? My bias is always, are you going to be able to differentiate yourself in the next 12 to 18 months in terms of how you're going to help someone reach back to marketing 101, how are you going to make sure you're able to help someone reach the right consumer at the right time, in the right channel, in a world where most of those decisions may be ultimately made in milliseconds by the new agent you launched in 6 months?
Jay, what about you? What do you think
I,
the common barriers or gotchas are?
so I agree with the economic significance that of the model that Jonathan was talking about, but I get there I think a different way, um, which is that one of the huge barriers is the people. The technology is always easy, because it's it's software and it's cooperative, but people are not software and they're not necessarily cooperative.
Very
Um,
true.
and so AI maturity, and employee resistance, I think, are barriers. I have pretty consistently heard, over the last 18 months, that the agency population divides into thirds, where one third is all in, excited, motivated, ready to tackle this new era, that includes a new set of tools. There is another third that is a bit skeptical, but movable. Um, Not quite sure how this fits in their daily work lives, or maybe have some hesitations as to what it means for their daily work lives. But as I say, movable and movable once you start, enablement and and give them the opportunity to experiment and to learn. And then you've got the other third, which is you've probably guessed is resistant. The like hell no group. Right? And um, so I think whether you're 100,000 or 100,000 person organization, or a 100 person agency, you've got two-thirds of your employees that you've got to work on, some of these issues, and one side of the population is going to be much easier than the other. Um, and I don't think this is going to be very easy for, either any whether independent agency or otherwise. It's not an easy task to get people to change. And I hypothesize that the divisions, if you will, are somewhat run along, some lines of demographics, in that more tenured talent tends to be a bit more comfortable, based upon years of experience and an understanding of craft, and just knowing how to ask the right questions, in the end to develop marketing solutions. Whereas less tenured employees, I think, feeling a bit more concerned about it. Junior talent, quite frankly, I think being fearful of automation and replacement, and one of my colleagues was telling me about a trend that had been hearing about just as of the last week or so, where Gen Z employees are basically sabotaging internal AI in the workplace because of their concern for what it means for their jobs. And when I say sabotaging, they're not destroying the NVIDIA chips or, or or anything that. I think it's about feeding it, erroneous data, or in some form of, like, a quiet non-compliance. Um, and so why are they doing this? They're doing this because the social contract has been broken, especially when it comes to agencies. And, I mean, yes, the agency employees are somewhat accustomed to things like, layoffs or the ebb and flow of business when accounts, come and go. But I think it's really exacerbated as of late. And and that, the social contract of being expendable needs to be corrected. And so this really comes, and this is where it comes back to what Jonathan was saying, because in order to rewrite that social contract and address the concerns of your employees, it really means you got to move away from to an actual contract exercise, which is getting away from labor contracts and moving into contracts that don't put agencies in a position where labor becomes variable based upon business. So outcomes based remuneration, or SaaS based contract deals, or fixed fee deals that ignore necessarily the time and the scope. And so if we can move out of the dependence of, like, labor arbitrage, then I think you make a massive advancement in being able to address the maturity of your employees, and bring the value that we've talked about for the last 40 minutes, of marketing using AI.
Yeah. And Jay, I think there's with that point, I think it gets back to we've seen some of this story before, right? So I'll
Yeah.
go back and say right now, Mark Cuban says there's only going to be two types of companies in the future, and one of them is not going to be around very long. Those who become good at AI and those that aren't, right? And I think, if we go back to when the rise of the internet popped in and changed how my career worked and a lot of other people's, that time was you either believed that the internet was going to be transformative to how businesses operated or you didn't, right? And a lot of publishers and a lot of other folks didn't believe it was going to be transformative and, ultimately found out it was very transformative, right? So you see a lot of that same tension, I think, inside of this type of seismic change. That was a massive change of how consumer behavior was going to be. This is going to be a massive change, I think, ultimately with consumer, but let's focus solely on this is going to be a massive change on how companies work going forward
Hmm.
and how we train, how we grow, how we ultimately empower and augment our staff to be successful. And to your point, I think it's going to force more alignment on outcomes throughout the organization. But this change is going to be here, right? Like I think trying to fight it off is, even as we see this massive exuberance of investment in AI solutions and the costs that are associated with it, there is still going to be change from this, right? And so I think that's just it's an exciting time. I would always encourage everyone to be excited about change and thinking about how you're going to be the navigator of that in your own company, in your own, day-to-day job, as well as with your clients, because it's coming.
All right, guys, one more question, rapid fire. We're going to make this a quick one. I always love an actionable insight that people can walk away from this call and start thinking about or start doing. If you're advising an agency right now, what would you tell them is the most important action that they can take to stay competitive? We talked a lot about the industry changes. What's the one thing that they can do, the most important thing that they can do to stay competitive right now? Jay?
For independent agencies that have more autonomy and flexibility. I think they are more likely to be faster and more successful in their attempts to address the labor model issue that we talked about. So my actionable step would be start or continue or accelerate experimentation with other economic models.
I love that. Jonathan?
Yeah, I think I'll lean in a little bit of the number one thing you have to do is identify how you're going to build competitive advantage by integrating your client's first party data into the workflow you're doing, right? There has to be this idea for agencies of owning a consumer data layer that is interoperable with their clients and interoperable with the marketplace so they can actually continue to tell the story how they're going to be the best partner to bring the right consumer to the right message in the right channel at the right time to drive outcomes for that, for their clients, right? Whatever those outcomes may be. I think the failure right now is going to be to rely on the industry to do that for you, because as these barriers and these interconnectivity continues to increase, if you're not helping clients answer that key question of who should I reach with this message, with my next dollar to drive an outcome, I think you're going to be in a very challenged space over the next couple of years as these pipelines open up in terms of agentic workflows that everyone from every walled garden to every tech platform to every solution is going to look to try to take away the dollars around performance. I think you have to be leaning in on we're going to help you find the right person as a core value proposition as an agency, which by the way is exactly what the investment the holdcos all made 10 plus years ago, was to make sure they could own who the next best customer was going to be through those billion-dollar acquisitions we talked about.
Well, one of the most important takeaways from our conversation today was really the need for independent agencies to innovate their business models and monetize the proprietary data with the help of AI. How do we think about selling outcomes and not hours? Now, whether that shift is something you are actively building right now, or you're gearing up to invest in, or perhaps you're just beginning to consider it, we're going to be hosting an additional webinar coming up on June 16th to really help you decide what is that next step and how do I take it. We're calling this session the Agency Survival Guide, and Jonathan's going to be back with us to take a little bit more of a deeper look at the practical steps that your agency can take to really build a proprietary consumer data layer, to incorporate that owned intelligence into your product offerings. And how do you think about really leveling that playing field against holding companies? If you're interested, you can scan the QR code that we've got up on the screen. We'll also be sure to send you a link to the webinar and our follow-up email along with the recording of today's session. And lastly, I'm sure there were lots of questions today about the new marketing OS that we didn't get to, and I do apologize. It was a great conversation with Jonathan and Jay. If you're interested in continuing that conversation and understanding more about how Resonate can support independent agencies in their growth and their evolution, please schedule some time to meet with us. We'd love to talk to you. Again, there's a new QR code on the screen, and you can schedule that meeting today. Jonathan, Jay, thank you guys so much for such a fantastic session. We really enjoyed it. I think we could have talked for another hour. It was really insightful. Thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and we bid you a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jay. It's
Thank
great connecting with you again.